is so good to be with you. It has been a few weeks since, all kinds of things going on, other places to speak and things like that. But I know you guys were under the best care with Aaron and JoJo. How about JoJo last week? But we are continuing in the book of Romans. Just so you guys know, we're going to be taking a small little break from Romans during December, as we're going to be doing an Advent series. I'll tell you more about that after Thanksgiving. But we still have a couple weeks of Romans, and then we'll come back in January and finish up Romans. So Romans chapter 11. If you don't have a Bible, we have Bibles over there. You can grab one, or you can share with your neighbor. As you turn to chapter 11, let me just remind you what is happening in Romans. It was written by Paul, and he is speaking to the church in Rome. Very good. As he is loving, and he had heard the great things that were going on there, but also some trouble that they've been going through between the Gentile Christians, who are basically anybody who's not a Jew, and the Jewish Christians, and how in time these Jewish Christians came in and be like, yeah, you're saved, but also you need to add all these things along the way. And so really starting to preach a false gospel, a gospel of works. And so Paul's like, I got to clear this up. I got to clear up what the gospel truly is. And he goes into just this crazy, just chapter after chapter, just breaking it down, reminding them that it's not about works, but it's all about grace. It's all about the works of Jesus and putting our trust on him. And in the last two chapters, we really started breaking down, especially chapter 9. We broke down this idea of God's chosen people, his people, that he is like predestined. He used the word predestined in this idea that somehow, in the mystery of God, predestination works hand in hand with a person being drawn by God and believing onto salvation. So this idea that God predestines who will be saved, and we must choose Christ in order to be saved. Both facts are equally true. And in God's mystery, as he continues to bring in this word, and he will in this chapter as well, it can get a little confusing because we're just dust trying to understand an eternal God. And it'll be no different in this chapter and some things that he's trying to present to us, okay? But also, last chapter, talking about this, we get to respond. We get to respond to God. So I'm going to give you the points right away so that you can find them as we go verse by verse in chapter 11. Fair? Okay, so the first one is this, that God is patient. God is patient, okay? But God's patience is gracious, has purpose, and is full of wisdom. Let me say it again, don't worry. God's patient, but God's patience is gracious, has purpose, and is full of wisdom. Everybody get that? Ask your neighbor if you didn't. So I wanted to give you that right away because this passage kind of can go back and forth with those ideas as I read it and I broke it down and the things that I felt like our group could pull out of here, this idea of patience. So let me ask you this. When's the last time you were like really patient with somebody? Does anybody have a short fuse when it comes to patience? This guy, right? Me for sure. Like, I think I'd like to say that in my time, in my years of being on this planet, I've grown more patient. Like, if you would have met me 15 years ago, like, I would just short fuse. But just with maybe age and aging like a fine wine, being able to, like, slow the world down, or I've seen enough life to be like, you know what? It's not that crazy. Like, it's going to be okay. I've survived moments like this before. I've seen things like this before, so things can slow down. But if you think about just patience and like being patient with people, being patient with siblings, being patient with family members, you're like, siblings, never. Or with parents, please. Friends, or being even patient with ourselves, right? How intense we can be with ourselves, a short fuse toward ourselves. This idea of patience, I mean, in it, it's basically the capacity to accept or tolerate delay. It's trouble or suffering without getting angry or getting upset. Again, patience is something just sometimes can be so foreign to us, especially in our world today. I don't know about you, but living through the pandemic years, patience didn't seem to be on the front of many people's minds. It was like, get mine, anger, upset. If you don't believe in what I believe in, I'm coming after you. God is incredibly rich in patience. The depths of his patience are amazing. At the very end of chapter 10, verse 21, say, I got it if you got it. He says this, but of Israel, he says, all day long I have held out my hands to a disobedient and contrary people. Let me pause there for a second. This is the picture, right? It's like Thea. Sorry, Thea, you're right here, so I'm going to pick on you a little bit. If Thea is representing Israel and I'm representing God, it's this idea of his hand is being held out to Israel for help, to love them, to care for them, and to pull them in, to rescue them, to save them, right? But it's not one of these. Sometimes we read that, it's like this. It's like the idea of like, you need help, whatever the situation is, and my hand's like this. Are you going to grab it? I guess if you need something, I'm here, right? Sometimes we can paint that picture with God, that his hand is held out to us or held out to his people as just kind of like a favor or just something that he has to do because he made us or because he's God. That's not it at all. It's this beautiful choice that he makes to reach out his hand and says, I got you, Thea. No more. You don't need to do this on your own. You don't need to go and get lost and try to figure it out on yourself and be contrary to yourself and walk away from me and be disobedient. I got you. I will save you. I will bring you in. Here's my hand. Take it. And for some of us, we'd be down to do that once, maybe twice, maybe 3 times, maybe, if you're extra patient, 5 times. But for him to say all day, like consistently, I am there. This idea of all day, oh, God only waited 1 day? No, it's like us saying like a minute or saying like, I've been holding out my hand for a minute. You don't literally mean a minute. You mean like for a while. Right? So this idea of all day, the eternal God is sharing with us his incredible patience that all day I've held out my hand to these contrary, disobedient people, the people who don't care about me. They don't love me. They're not for me. They turn their backs on me on a regular basis. Yet I am patient with them. My hand held out, calling them to myself. That's the depth of this patient God that we serve. And not just to Israel, but even onto us. And we're going to get into some of that in just a second. So Paul says after that, so what would you say, right? He's always starting with these chapters with like assuming what they might say, the Gentiles or the Jews. What question might they come up with the point that he just made? And here it is. Ready? Verse 1. I ask then, has God rejected his people? Right? Meaning like, okay, well then if they've been so disobedient and so contrary and they never grabbed his hand, then he just rejected them? He just sent them away? He doesn't care about them? Now, why is this a big deal? Because his people, he's talking about the Jews. Jews, if you know the Old Testament covenant with Abraham, which all the boys who went to the retreat should know what the heck that is because we pound that into their head, all right, is this idea that Abraham was promised that through him a nation would come and that all the world would be blessed, right, through Israel. These are his people. And so he's saying because they were contrary, because their back was turned to you, God, then God's just going to reject them, basically turn back on his promise and turn back on what he said he would actually do. What does he say? His famous words. By no means. Drop the thought. Don't even think about that. That's not true. That's not real. For I myself, so Paul goes directly into self-testimony. Let me testify to you about myself. He's a Jew himself, right? So if he was rejected by God, he couldn't make this next statement that he's saying. For I myself am an Israelite, a descendant of Abraham, a member of the tribe of Benjamin. God has not rejected his people whom he foreknew. Do you not know that the scriptures say, pause there for a second. So again, he uses his testimony immediately. He's like, God didn't reject his people. Look at me. I'm literally a descendant from Abraham. That promise has been kept even if it just was with me. And what I get to do now and spread the gospel and spread the truth. So no, don't say that. Don't say that, because they didn't grab his hand, that he just rejected them and let them go. And he uses another example. God has not rejected his people whom he foreknew. Do you not know what the scripture says of Elijah, how he appeals to God against Israel. So he's going back into 1 Kings story that happens here where Elijah says this, Lord, they have killed your prophets. They have demolished your altars. Who's he talking about? Who are they? Who do you think he's talking about? Israel. God's very people, he's saying, have killed your prophets, they demolished your altars, and I alone am left, and they seek my life. But what is God's reply to him? I have kept for myself 7,000 men who have not bowed the knee to Baal. So, too, at the present time, there is a remnant chosen by grace. But if it is by grace, it is no longer on the basis of works. Otherwise, grace would no longer be grace. What is he saying here? He's like, listen, first of all, a remnant is a small remaining quantity of something. And he's saying, no matter how dark it gets, no matter how much people turn on God, he will never turn on his people. There will always even be a small remnant of that, of who he is, of his promise. And he uses himself as an example, right? Paul, in his time, man, yes, there was others that were going and spreading the gospel, but there was no real other like Paul. I mean, what God was doing through Paul to go and to preach to the Gentiles the way that he did is incredible, and it is a gift from God. It's a gift. And so he uses this Old Testament story as well to remember, hey, when it was the darkest for Israel, even then God was like, watch this. I still have a group. But Paul makes it very clear, but it wasn't because of anything that I did that God has, been able to continue to bring truth to this world, or anything that these 7,000 men did. It has nothing to do with their works. It is completely by grace. God's patience is full of grace. It is dripping in grace. 6 tells us that the election of grace is important to be seen. It's not works. What is grace? It's the free gift of God, not given with an eye to performance or potential in the one receiving it, but given only out of kindness in the giver. Kindness in the giver, that he wants to offer his hand, that he wants to give to his people. That's what grace is. That's what comes with it. We're the ones that immediately attach works to it. Immediately, with my hand being held out, that as soon as she grabs it, oh, I look at all the work I did. Seriously? You were lost. If I didn't even show up, you'd be dead. There'd be nothing for you. But yet we love to claim that. What are we doing? There's nothing to that other than leaning in, other than grabbing on. Oh, but Arnold, I'm grabbing on real tight. Isn't that good work? Seriously? No. The kindness of the Lord is what leads this grace, this remnant, there's always this opportunity of, like, even in the bleakest, darkest moment, God is there. Let's go to 7. What then? Israel failed to obtain what it was seeking. The elect obtained it, but the rest were hardened. As it is written, God gave them a spirit of stupor, eyes that would not see and ears that would not hear, down to this very day. And David says, let their tables become a snare and a trap, a stumbling block and a retribution for them. Let their eyes be darkened so that they cannot see, and bend their backs forever. Listen, what is being understood too here, and Paul's getting at, and he's having to make he's trying to explain, is this: there are in their time Jewish people who have walked away, even in Rome, even among their time. And so they're trying to understand, okay, if God elected these people, if they're his chosen people, and they keep turning their backs on them, and God seems to not be necessarily like chasing them and kind of letting them roam and letting them do their thing, did God just reject his people? Did he just forget all about them? Because it seems like some of them are incredibly hardened and obviously put Jesus on the cross. So what is going on here? Are they his people or not? And so Paul leans into this unpacking of like, look, there are Jews, there are people who are through the elect, they are through the ones that are from the promise of Abraham and God's people, but they've hardened their own hearts. They've turned their backs on him. And so God's like, all right, here you go, have it. You need to also understand, God is never going to force you into a relationship with him. He's never going to force these people into anything. He will be present, and he will have his hand held out, and he will continue to be patient, but he will never force anyone. But there's also some strategy and some purpose to his patience, okay? So here he starts unpacking that. So this whole hardening of a heart and putting them in this place, that word stupor, or however you say it, it's an attitude of deadness towards spiritual things. It's this attitude of deadness towards spiritual things. And I'm going to tell you, it was packed with those people around Jesus' time, around Paul's time. And so you're like, okay, like I don't understand why though, because they had already chose it. It's like this. It's like the prodigal son story, right? When the son comes and he says, hey, I wish you dead. Give me my inheritance. I want to go. The father doesn't say, oh, no, don't do that. Stay with me. I got you. In fact, I'll just give you your inheritance, but come walk right in and just spend it all right here. It's fine. No, he says, oh, this is what you chose. Here you go. Have at it. I'm not going to force you here. But there's actually a purpose behind that. We're going to get a little more into that in just a second, okay? But he's just making it clear. Look, yeah, there is some hardened hearts here, but they had already chosen to do that and to go in that direction. But there's a purpose behind it. Let's keep reading. 11. So I ask, did they stumble in order that they might fall? By no means. There it is again. Rather, through their trespass, salvation has come to the Gentiles, so as to make Israel jealous. Now, if there is trespass, Now, if their trespass means riches for the world, and if their failure means riches for the Gentiles, how much more will their full inclusion mean? Now, I am speaking to you, Gentiles, inasmuch then as I am an apostle to the Gentiles, I magnify my ministry in order somehow to make my fellow Jews jealous, and thus save some of them. So what is the purpose behind it? First of all, right there where it says, so I asked, did they stumble in order that they might fall? Stumbling and falling are two very different things. Two very different things. Immediately when people are seeing these Jews fall, they think they're doomed. They're condemned. It's over. That's not it. Right? I mean, literally imagine the picture of running and you're stumbling and then you actually fall. Immediately we take the stumbling as a fall. I don't know how many times you will stumble in your faith or you will stumble as you walk with Jesus. It's going to be common and it's going to be often. But how often do we turn that stumbling into, it's over, I'm condemned, I need to stay here forever, Jesus hates me, I'm never going to make it back, woe is me, right? I've used this example to you guys many times, right? Anybody ever seen anybody trip at school? Fantastic. It's funny sometimes, right? Maybe you help them after. Relax, Kena, you help them after. But in the moment. Or how about those moments where you've tripped and you like saved yourself? Have you ever seen that, right? Or have you ever seen somebody like trip? They do the push-up thing. Oh, I got this, right? I meant to fall, right? Or like you're walking. Or have you ever seen somebody like walk, trip, stumble, and then just on the way down, I mean, their face is this close to the ground. And all of a sudden, they like stand up and everything's fine. They just keep going. Like nothing happened, right? Because they don't want to be seen as like, whoops, I'm clumsy and I messed up, right? But imagine being at school and you actually stumble and you actually fall on the ground and you sit there and your friends watch you and maybe they laugh a little bit because that's a thing, right? And you say, go on. Life is over. Wait, what are you saying, Arnold? Get out, bro. We got to make it to class. No, that's it. I'm going to sit right here. Life means nothing. It's meaningless. I give up. on life. Your friends would be like, bro, you're crazy. Look, you could just stand right up. They might even give you a hand, man, like, we'll get you up. And you just kept pushing them away and pushing them away. That might be funny, but that's exactly how we run our faith sometimes. Just like that. Don't confuse a stumble with a fall. Don't do that. Because Paul's making it very clear there's two very different things here. So yeah, his people are stumbling, but they're not condemned. They've not fallen to a place that they're not reached ever again. And then he gets into the purpose. God is so amazing that he even hardened these hearts, allowed these hearts to be hardened, and send them off and do their thing, and he's going to use it for good. And what does he say he uses it for? I'm using it to bring Gentiles to myself. I'm using it to bring others to myself. You got to know this. If God ever does let you go like the prodigal son, it's not because he hates you. It's not because he doesn't love you anymore. It's not because he gave up on you. It's not because he's not patient with you anymore. It's actually for your good so that you can go and you can taste and you can see that world, it's not enough. It'll never be as kind and loving as God. It'll never provide the needs that God has. And sometimes we need to be let go. Go taste it. Go see it like the prodigal son. I wouldn't recommend it. But it's for a purpose. The hope is that you'll come back tenfold, understanding, whoa, would I recommend it? Absolutely not. Because the repercussions, the consequences, we don't know what those can be like, right? But God is not this enslaving, you better stay here type of being. Like, that's not who he is. He wants you to choose. And so here, he even uses this. His very people. Who would have thought, right? Because think about it. If you go back to the covenant of Abraham, that he will bless all the nations, right? Immediately you think that word and we think, oh, they're going to do great in the world and they're going to dance and they're going to twirl and it's going to be such a blessing and people are going to watch Israel and be like, oh my gosh, look, I want to be like them. Sometimes that's how we assume about blessing the nations. But what if in their crap, in their disobedience, in their turning of their backs on God, that's how they bless the world. God still blessed the world, even in their disobedience, even in their contrary hearts. He still blessed the world. God still pulled out the good in the midst of the bad to bless the world, to bring people to himself. And then I love what Paul says. And then I'm giving my full self, my full ministry to the Gentiles in a way that even the Jews might feel jealous. It's a good, provoking jealous. It's not that like evil, terrible jealousy. It's this idea. If I'm a Jew and I've turned my back on God and I'm kind of walking in my own route and I'm watching Paul, another Jew, love and care and teach the gospel and the Gentiles are getting the gospel, it's like me seeing that and being like I was born into a family, into a world where that's been taught to me since I was very little. And a Gentile who wasn't even born into that, they're getting it, and I'm not getting it? Again, to draw them back. Almost this like jealousy of like, wait, man, that religion is mine. What are you doing with it? It's like, yeah, you're right. You should be living it out too, but you're not. This idea of comfort is being portrayed in what Paul is saying for the Jews. It's like this picture. It's like the Jews are sitting that have turned their backs on God. It's like they're sitting at a table and they're having dinner. And they're so comfortable in being chosen by God and being at the dinner table with God that they just forget who God is. They don't care about God anymore. And they just get comfortable. And the enemy sneaks in and takes over. Like it's that type of comfort. And he's kind of pressing the Jews who probably are reading this letter too. Like, hey, don't get comfortable. Just because you were born into it, of knowing of who God is, that's not enough. That's not enough. You still have a choice. You need to still lean in. You cannot just be adopted in. Just it's how it is. No. And it's not about works. It's about the grace of God. Lean into that. Okay, let's keep going. So 15. Okay, sorry, no, JK. I wanted to say something at the end of 12. Look at 12. Now, if their trespasses, meaning these Jews, means riches for the world, right? There's that blessing, there's that richness, that people, because of their disobedience. Here's a great example, okay, of this disobedience he's talking about. And again, this may sound a little twisted. Just follow me for a second. All of the Jews who put Jesus on the cross, okay, their disobedience actually ended up blessing us. Wait, what? Think about it. Think about it. Jesus was sacrificed. Somebody had to do it. These guys, in the midst of their disobedience and they're turning back on God, did the deed, which you and I get to reap the benefits of. Does that make sense? But also twisted at the same time? You know what I'm saying? So that's where that richness comes. So even though, right, these guys' trespasses, these people who turned their backs on God, brought richness to the world, and their failures mean richness for the Gentiles, those who are not Jews, how much more will their full inclusion mean? Oh, I love that. So imagine if in their trespasses, in their turning their back on God, not wanting anything to God, God still used it for good to bring people to themselves. Imagine if those people were actually walking with God, what this world would get would be tenfold, 100-fold. It would be incredible to see. And again, if I'm a Jew in Rome trying to create this gospel of works, and I read a letter like this, yeah, I'm feeling a little like attacked here. Like, oh my gosh, man, if I'm not truly about Jesus and I'm turning my back, okay, God's going to do you, Arnold, but I'm going to use your story. I'm going to use your faith. I'm going to use this truth to bring people to myself. So you can join us or you can stay over there. But if I am fully in, meaning there's still an opportunity for me to be fully in. Wow, God's patience in that. I don't have to stay over there. I can come here. And God is telling me through this passage, Paul's telling me, what more could God do if I'm fully in as a chosen one, as a part of God's promised people? Wow. I love that he sneaks that in there. 15. For if their rejection means the reconciliation of the world, there it is again, what will their acceptance mean but life from the dead? If the dough offered as first fruits is holy, so is the whole lump. Sorry, hold on a second. I'm lost here for a second. Okay. And if the root is holy, so are the branches. But if some of the branches were broken off, and you, although a wild olive shoot, were grafted in among the others, and now share in the nourishing root of the olive tree, do not be arrogant toward the branches. If you are, remember, it is not you who support the root, but the root that supports you. Let me pause there for a second. What are you saying? This idea of first fruit, okay, meaning the first Christians who were Jews. Okay, some people believe that maybe he was talking about the patriarchs, but it makes more sense that he's talking about those early Christians, okay? That those first roots, they matter. God is using them, okay? But then he gives this picture of an olive tree, okay? So imagine there's a tree right up here. I thought about bringing in a tree, but it's too heavy. So imagine a tree right in here, right? You got the roots into the tree, then you got the whole stump, and then you got the branches coming out, right? And so he builds this idea that God, Christ himself, is the actual true, is at the roots, right? Where else have we heard this? If you go back to John, right, this idea of remaining in him, right? Okay, I won't go all there. But anyway, here it is again. And so he's talking about these branches, and some of them have been cut off. That's scary. And you think about that. Because when you're cut off, right, very visual he's getting here with this whole idea that he's teaching, and you get thrown off, what happens to that branch? It dies. It's on its own. It's gone, right? And he said, so some of these were cut off, and you, Gentile, he's talking about, have been grafted in, right? This idea that almost like you've been sewed into the tree, right? So now you're a part of the tree. He hits them up too and says, hey, don't get all cocky thinking that like, look, I'm a branch over here. I'm like a part of the tree. Look at me thrive. Look at me, bloom and do all the things. He's like, no. The only reason that you can bloom, the only reason that you can continue to grow and you don't die is because you're connected to the vine. You're connected to the root. Coming back to the root, that's the most important thing. So don't start boasting. Don't start thinking that you got it all figured out either. Because you have experienced the patience and the grace and the purpose of God by being grafted in. Does that make sense? Now it gets really wild. Watch this. Oh boy. 19. Then you will say, branches were broken off so that I might be grafted in. That is true. They were broken off because of their what? Unbelief. But you stand fast through faith. So do not become proud, but fear. For if God did not spare the natural branches, neither will he spare you. What the frick? What? Some people will go to this passage and say, see, you can lose your salvation. Isn't that interesting? And if you read it just kind of like that, you'd be like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. No, that's not it. Because you go back and you read the overpowering passages that says that no one will pull you out, no one will take you out, that you are sealed in Christ, that the Holy Spirit that is deposited into you will keep you, all those things, right? So what is this saying? See, there's a difference between losing your salvation and walking away from God. Those are two very different things. Like the prodigal son again, even though he took off, he was still that man's son. He was still his son. But he's like, I'm out, I'm going to go do my thing. And he did not believe in the Father. He didn't even believe himself as the son. At some point in the midst of all his trespasses, he's like, I don't even deserve to be a son. I'll just be a slave. There's something to be said about God's hand being held out to us and us continuously just saying, I don't want it. I don't want it. Get it out of here. Nope, put it away. Nope. In fact, you know what? I'm out. I'm leaving. I'm gone. I'm going in this direction. And God, in my opinion, is such a gentleman that he says, okay, go. Why? Because he doesn't love you, doesn't care about you, or he gave up on you? No. Because he's not willing to save you? No. I would say for the purpose of your return. Because he knows what's out there. He knows it will never fill you. He knows it will never fully satisfy you. He knows that you won't find what you think you're looking for. He knows that. Does he want you to go? Absolutely not. Did the father want his prodigal son to leave? Absolutely not. But he let him go for a purpose. There's even patience in that purpose. You don't have children in here, and if you do, well, okay. But that's one of my boys right back there. And it's already tough to have patience when we are like together and as I'm guiding him and leading him. But if I had to let him go and hope and pray that he will return, imagine the depths of that patience. Because you know what dad wants to do? Oh, you want to go? Oh, I'll go with you. Come on, let's go. And then I'll keep helping you along the way, right? And sadly, many parents do that. They just kind of give in. And I'll just go with you along the way, right? And if anything, become a harbor for sin and trespass of their children. God doesn't do that. So imagine the patience, the agony. Like, Arnold, how long are you going to roam those valleys, man? Arnold, how long are you going to go and just throw your life away? Imagine the patience of that. Even deeper. I can't, my head cannot fully wrap its head around like the patience of God, even in the midst of that. Watch this. So good. Thank you, Paul. 22. Neither will he spare you. Ooh. Note then the kindness and the severity of God. Severity toward those who have fallen. But God's kindness to you, provided you continue in his kindness. Otherwise, you too will be cut off. And even they, if they do not continue in their unbelief, will be grafted in. For God, there's the remnant again. For God has the power to graft them in again. For if you were cut from what is by nature a wild olive tree and grafted, contrary to nature, into a cultivated olive tree, how much more will these, the natural branches, be grafted back into their own olive tree? So he's saying, even these people, these Jews who were cut off and were sent off, and do you, God's grace is so amazing. His remnant still is there. His patience is still there. That if their unbelief ends, meaning they lean into the kindness of God, they even can be grafted in. Once again, the patience of God. So even when you are cut off, there's still hope. Even when you do choose to say, peace, deuces, God, there's still hope. But between you and me, it won't be that way forever. I've said this to you before. We are in a season, we are in an age of hope and grace, but there will come an age of judgment. And that's when it all comes to fruition. Where do we stand? But let's not keep slapping God's hand away. No, I've only been halfway through the chapter, so let me just sum up a little bit because I want to get to the end of the chapter, okay? So in the next part of the passage, it starts talking about the mystery of God bringing Israel, like saving Israel. Like there is this mystery because they are his chosen people and he loves them and he's for them. And he starts breaking down this idea that in God's way, in his mystery, he will bring mercy to his people. And that it's tough to even balance and understand. But what I will pull out of that for us is once again, his incredible patience and grace toward us, toward his people. He doesn't just leave us to die. There is grace and purpose to his patience, but there's also wisdom. And that's where I'd like to end. Okay, so shoot quickly to verse 33. This verse right here, when you feel lost or your head's spinning about God, spinning about the things of God, the mysteries of God, go to this verse. Let it calm you. Because you're supposed to be feeling that way. Because you're trying to understand a unfathomable God. Like we can't fully grasp him. So look at what it says. After all this idea of judgment, all this idea of mercy, all this idea of branches and being grafted in and being pursued and being loved and being patient with, this is what he says. Oh, the depth of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God. The deepness. He's like, it is so unfathomable. Oh, the depth of how rich he is toward us. His wisdom, his knowledge. How unsearchable are his judgments. Did you catch that? How unsearchable are his judgments. You know where this helps? When many of us get into this soapbox of like, but what about the people in the jungle in Africa and they've never heard of God? What's going to happen there? How is that fair? God, you're not fair. You're not fully loving and judging, because what about them? Let me tell you, I don't believe that we're all necessarily, and please hold this with the idea that I am also dust, okay? But God is the ultimate judge, and he is going to judge accordingly. How does that fully play out? I do not know. Because the scriptures also say that the heavens declare the glory of God and that they draw you to him. So maybe, just maybe, that draw to that person in Africa that you keep referring to, I don't know why, someone that lives in the jungle, because it happens. I've heard many of teens say that, right? And they feel like they stumped you. Please, okay? God is bigger than that, okay? That even they can look to the stars and that will draw them to God. Versus you and I, who were born here with maybe a Bible on our lap, I believe we're going to be judged accordingly, according to what's been revealed to us. But something will be revealed. I promise you that. That, I believe God promises to us, that no one will be without excuse. But that excuse or that revelation, I don't believe will look the same to everyone. So if you're thinking that the person in the jungle doesn't get to go to church, doesn't get to read a real Bible because they weren't born with it or they didn't have Christian parents, so woe is them, relax. God is bigger than that. He's going to reveal himself to them however he wants to. Because I don't know about you, but you realize the early church didn't have a Bible, right? Yet they believed. So everyone will be judged accordingly. And this passage backs that up because it's literally telling us, look, let me keep going. How unsearchable are his judgments and how inscrutable his ways. That word inscrutable means impossible to understand or interpret. Impossible to understand or interpret. Meaning his judgment, it's literally impossible to fully understand. So even for me to answer your question about the person in the jungle, I don't know how it's fully going to play out. Only God does. For me to tell Ava, that she's fully saved, we had this conversation, that she's fully saved, what does it mean? I'm not God. All I was given was the scriptures that say, hey, you want to know if Ava's saved? You're going to see it in her life. By this, and this. Okay, cool. But I don't know if she's faking it. Because I'm not in charge of her heart. God is in charge of her heart. God will judge accordingly. And that's what I love about God. So you think about children that die early. Are they saved? I think God judges accordingly. You think about people who are on the spectrum, who don't understand. They don't understand the truth. Are they not going to heaven? I'm hitting you with a lot of these, I know, but you've asked them, right? I think God will judge accordingly. He knows the heart. He sees the heart. Thank God for that. Thank God that it's not black and white. Thank God that it's not black and white, because it's not that way. Because I just gave you 5 examples of how it can't be black and white. It can't. It's why it messes with your head. But God, in his wisdom, in his mystery, in his unsearchable, ununderstandable judgment and knowledge, he's the perfect judge. So we must trust him. We must trust him with those children. We must trust him with those who maybe don't fully understand. We must trust him with those who are living in the jungle who've never seen a Bible. We must trust him with our own hearts. Because he is a patient, gracious, loving God. The depths of that are just, we can't fully understandable. And if we judge judgment, love, patience, richness, knowledge, according to our understanding of it, if we judge him on those topics according to our understanding of it, we're bleak. We're too small. Yeah. If we judge it according to what we think we understand, then yeah, good luck. You've just created a God that's completely understandable, which means, by definition, is no real God. Okay. Light and just super light, right? And let me pray for us. And if you want to have more questions after this, happy Thanksgiving. I love you guys. Jesus, thank you so much for your truth as we unpack your word. God, may we have taken just maybe one nugget out of this to just apply to our lives, God, as continues to just guide us to yourself. God, we thank you. What the scriptures say here about unbelief, Lord, looks like not relying and leaning on your kindness. Like, so what you're saying, Lord, is you just want us to lean on your kindness. And that leads us to you. And leads us to your goodness. It leads us to repentance. It leads us to transformation. Because your kindness is so overwhelming. I mean, God, I pray that every soul in this room may experience the depths of your kindness. That all it does is just continue to draw us more to you. Deposit peace into our hearts where there only wants to live unbelief or anger or frustration. We can take deep breaths because your kindness is available to us. In Jesus' name, amen.